On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the sky over Hawaii was perfectly clear. 40 aircraft emerged from the cloud cover above Oahu, flying in tight formation at low altitude. They were Japanese torpedo bombers, sleek and purposeful. Cutting through the humid Pacific air, their target was already in sight, the American battleships moored at Pearl Harbor, sitting defenseless in the morning sun. The planes that carried out this strike were Nakajima B5N Kates. At that moment, they were about to change the course of the war. But here's what made that morning so historically significant. The Kate wasn't supposed to be there. By 1941, it was already considered obsolete. The Japanese Navy had been designing its replacement for years. No armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no forward-firing guns to defend itself. The aircraft was, by every technical standard, a flying coffin. Yet it was the Kate that delivered the blow that crippled America's Pacific Fleet. And then, defying all expectations, it would dominate the Pacific for another 3 years. This is the story of an aircraft nobody should have succeeded, yet somehow did. Japan's naval air arm had spent the 1930s building a reputation as the most advanced in the world. In 1937, the Navy issued a specification for a new carrier-based torpedo bomber. They wanted something fast, agile, and capable of delivering a heavy torpedo from extreme range. The answer came from Nakajima, a company that had already proven itself with the D-3A dive bomber. Their new design, the B5N-1, first flew in 1938. What emerged was elegant and purpose-built. The Kate was smaller than its Western counterparts, the British Swordfish and the American Devastator, just 20 meters long with a wingspan of just over 15 meters. It was cramped inside, with barely enough room for the pilot, bombardier, and rear gunner to move. The engine was a Nakajima Sakai, generating around 1,000 horsepower, not particularly powerful by international standards. But in the hands of Japanese designers, it was enough. What made the Kate special was its efficiency. Every unnecessary pound was stripped away. The airframe was aluminum, not armor. The fuel lines weren't sealed. The pilot had no back armor, no protection beneath the seat. It was designed with the assumption that Japanese pilots were so skilled they would never be caught. And in the early war, when Japanese pilots had vastly superior training and experience, that assumption held. But by 1941, everything was changing. The Imperial Japanese Navy knew that war with America was coming. They'd been planning a preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor since the previous year. The question was simple: which aircraft could deliver the most devastating blow? The answer, they decided, was the Kate. 40 of them were assigned to the Special Task Force under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. 40 aircraft, each carrying a single massive Type 91 torpedo. The Tokyo Air Staff briefed the pilots on the challenge. The harbor was shallow only. 35 feet of water separated the battleships from the bottom. A standard torpedo would bury itself in the mud before detonating. The Japanese had developed special, shallow-running torpedoes with wooden fins and drag devices to keep them from diving too deep. The Kates would carry these weapons at just 200 feet altitude, flying in at barely 80 knots. Every pilot understood the risk. The American fleet's anti-aircraft guns couldn't miss at those distances. But if they could deliver their torpedoes, they could sink the battleships. On November 23, 1941, the strike force departed from Japan. The strike Kates were lashed to the decks of 6 fleet carriers, along with dive bombers and fighters. For 2 weeks, the fleet steamed eastward across the Pacific, maintaining radio silence, hoping not to be detected. The pilots spent their time studying maps and photographs of Pearl Harbor, memorizing the layout, calculating approach angles and speeds. The night of December 6th, the fleet launched its aircraft. The Kates took off in darkness, forming up in their combat formations. The pilots could see the island of Oahu silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky as they descended toward the target. Inside the hangars and barracks at Pearl Harbor, American sailors were still sleeping. The anti-aircraft gun crews hadn't yet manned their positions. The battleships were lined up neatly in the harbor, vulnerable and exposed. The first waves of Kates appeared at 5:58 in the morning. Anti-aircraft fire erupted immediately, but it was too late. The Japanese had surprise, and they had it. Absolutely. The Kates made their first runs at 6 o'clock, and within seconds, the Arizona, Oklahoma, California, and West Virginia were mortally wounded. The shallow running torpedoes did their work with devastating precision. 4 battleships sank or capsized in the first 5 minutes. By the end of the morning, 4,400 men were dead. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged. The Kates had accomplished in 90 minutes what the entire American Navy couldn't have defended against if they'd been ready. The aircraft, everyone said was obsolete, had just sunk more capital ships than any other torpedo bomber in the entire war. But what nobody realized at that moment was that the Kate was just getting started. The Japanese Navy faced a critical decision in 1942. Their Kate squadron had proven itself at Pearl Harbor, but it was already being replaced by newer designs. The newer planes were faster and had better armament. On paper, they were superior. But Kate had something those new planes didn't have: experience. The pilots who flew Kates had trained for years in their specialized role. They understood the aircraft's quirks and limitations. They knew how to extract maximum performance from those limited resources. The Navy's solution was pragmatic. Keep the Kates in service. Keep training new pilots on them. Let them do what they did best: deliver torpedoes with accuracy and courage. The decision proved inspired. Over the next 3 years, Kates flew from every Japanese carrier. They sank the Lexington, the Yorktown, and the Hornet. They participated in attacks on Australia, the Indian Ocean, and the Solomon Islands. They became the backbone of Japanese carrier aviation, not because they were the best anymore, but because they were the only aircraft that could do the job with consistency. The Japanese built 1,149 Kates before the war ended. That was an enormous production run for a specialized torpedo bomber. Only the most successful designs got those kinds of numbers. It was a measure of confidence, and that confidence was justified. The Kate sank more Allied warships than any other Japanese aircraft. It was a record that stood for decades, but the cost was paid by the pilots. The Kate had no armor. It had no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single burst from American machine gun fire could shred the fuselage. The pilots knew this. They accepted it. In training films and pilot memoirs, Japanese naval aviators spoke of the Kate with a kind of fatalistic respect. The aircraft would take them where they needed to go, and if they lived to deliver their torpedo, it was almost a miracle. In 1943, the American Navy was learning to fight back. Carrier task forces were becoming more coordinated. Fighter coverage was improving. The Kates started taking casualties. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, nearly all the Kates launched were shot down. The pilots never reached their targets. 90% losses on a single mission. The aircraft that had changed history was becoming a relic. By 1945, there were almost no combat-capable Kates left. The last few were relegated to second-rate duty or modified for kamikaze attacks. Production had ended. The aircraft was forgotten, replaced by faster jets and better armed designs. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, the Kate had already faded from service. Today, not a single Nakajima B5N Kate survives in any museum anywhere in the world. Every example was either destroyed in combat, scrapped after the war, or lost at sea. The aircraft that began the Pacific War has left no physical trace. We know it only through photographs, documents, and the memories of those who flew it. What the Kate represents is a moment in history when technical specifications meant less than human skill and courage. The aircraft shouldn't have worked. It should have been shot to pieces on its first mission. But Butte wasn't. The Kates of Pearl Harbor proved that you could take a simple, lightly built aircraft and, with proper training and tactical surprise, accomplish the impossible. After Pearl Harbor, the United States would spend the entire war trying to catch up in torpedo bomber technology. The American Devastator was slow and vulnerable. When the Americans finally developed an adequate replacement, it was already 1943. By then, the Kate had been at war for 2 years, proving itself the superior design, despite being born earlier. The irony is that the underestimation worked both ways. The Japanese underestimated how quickly American industry could replace their losses. The Americans underestimated the competence and courage of their opponents. And both sides underestimated a simple torpedo bomber that nobody thought would matter. The Nakajima B5N Kate was declared obsolete the moment it entered service. By every logical standard, it should have failed. But it didn't. It became the most successful torpedo bomber of the war, sinking more enemy warships than any other aircraft of its type. It earned the respect of everyone who flew it and everyone who fought against it. Today, military historians point to the Kate as a perfect example of how personnel quality can overcome technical limitations. The aircraft survived and dominated not because it was the best, but because the men who flew it were better trained, better disciplined, better motivated. The Kate proved that courage and skill could compensate for aluminum skin and an underpowered engine. But there's a darker lesson too. The success of the Kate at Pearl Harbor showed that surprise and coordination could overcome almost any defense. The American Navy had the numbers and the superior ships, but none of it mattered that morning. A well-planned attack by an underpowered, lightly armed aircraft changed history. The lesson shaped military doctrine for decades. It's still being learned today. Do you think the B5N Kate deserves to be remembered as one of the most important aircraft of World War II, even though it was technically inferior to its replacements? Or has history rightly moved on to focus on faster, better armed aircraft? Hit like so YouTube shows this to more people who care about forgotten aviation history. Subscribe and you won't miss our next episode on the aircraft nobody expected to change the course of an entire war. Next time, we're heading to the Indian Ocean in 1942, where Japanese torpedo bombers made their last great victory, sinking HMS Hermes. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.